Beneath the serene and sun-dappled hills of Tuscany, a darkness lurked, one so profound it shattered the peaceful veneer of the Italian countryside and gripped a nation in terror for nearly 2 decades. This is the story of Il Mostro di Firenze, the Monster of Florence, a name that evokes a chilling saga of horror and mystery from 1968 to 1985. At the heart of this nightmare were young couples, seeking privacy in quiet, secluded parked cars, only to fall prey to a ruthless killer whose violence was as methodical as it was savage. The monster's brutal signature was unmistakable, a .22 caliber Beretta handgun delivered cold, precise executions, followed by grotesque post-mortem mutilations. The female victims bore the brunt of this unspeakable horror, their bodies savagely violated in ways that spoke of twisted ritual and rage. These crimes etched a dark scar on the Tuscan landscape, once known for its idyllic charm, now forever tainted as a stage of unspeakable atrocities. Our journey into this grim narrative begins on the night of August 23rd, 1968, in the small town of Signa. Here, Antonio Lobianco, 29, and Barbara Locci, 32, were found shot to death in their parked car. The chilling detail that sets this case apart: Barbara's 6-year-old son, Natalino Mele, was asleep in the back seat, an innocent witness to the carnage that would forever alter his life. Initial investigations mistakenly pinned the murder on Stefano Mele, the child's father, but this early conviction would unravel as the same weapon was later tied to subsequent killings. This first misstep hinted at the investigative chaos that would plague the case for years. As years passed, the monster's reign intensified with increasing brutality. On September 15, 1974, near Borgo San Lorenzo, Pasquale Gentilcore and Stefania Pettini, both teenagers, were slaughtered. Pettini's body was savagely mutilated, stabbed nearly 100 times, and viciously violated post-mortem with a grapevine stalk. This horrifying signature would be echoed in many of the monster's later attacks, emphasizing a deeply personal, detached cruelty from the faceless perpetrator. The 1980s brought a grim persistence in these killings. Giovanni Foggi and Carmela Denuccio were shot and stabbed near Scandicci in 1981, with Denuccio subjected to mutilation targeting her femaleness. Mere months later, Susanna Cambi and Stefano Baldi met the same fate near Calenzano. The killings were no longer just sporadic acts. They were a dark pattern, a macabre rhythm that shattered the sense of safety in the Tuscan hills. One particularly haunting episode occurred on June 19, 1982, near Bacaiano. Antonella Migliorini and Paolo Mainardi were attacked, with Mainardi initially surviving only to succumb later. Miscommunication and police leaks had falsely implied that Mainardi had regained consciousness, muddying the waters of witness testimony and investigation at a critical early stage. The terror even touched foreign tourists. In 1983, 2 young Germans, Horst Meyer and Jens-Uwe Rusch, were brutally killed near Galuzzo, their ordeal extending the fear beyond Tuscany to the wider world. Victims like Pia Rontini and Claudio Stefanacci, murdered in 1984, only deepened the collective dread. The final brutal crescendo came on September 8, 1985, with the double murder of French tourists Nadine Moriot and Jean-Michel Krevechvili near Scopetti. This case horrified even hardened investigators. A piece of Moriot's breast was severed and mailed anonymously to the Florence prosecutor's office, a macabre trophy that underscored the monster's depravity and need for dominance over his victims even beyond death. Throughout these years, the picturesque Tuscan hills, rolling landscapes dotted with vineyards and olive groves, were reluctantly transformed into grim crime scenes. The idyllic countryside could no longer shield its darkest secret. The fear permeated beyond the immediate locales, igniting national obsession and media frenzy. Every isolated parking area became a potential site of violence. Lovers feared intimacy under the open sky. Parents worried for their children. A community once secure found itself hunted by an invisible terror. This was a killer who not only ended lives but created a psychological shadow that cloaked the region in suspicion and dread. The horror of the murders was compounded by the post-mortem mutilations, acts that seemed to transcend mere killing, hinting at deep, disturbing motives. Female victims were mutilated in a way that suggested a symbolic or ritualistic element, shattering families and baffling investigators. At the center of the unfolding nightmare were the victims themselves, young, hopeful lives caught in their moments of vulnerability. Their stories are often overshadowed by the killer's infamy, but they remain the human heart of this tragedy. Antonio and Barbara Insignia, Stefania near Borgo San Lorenzo, Carmela and Giovanni near Scandici, and the others, each with their own dreams and futures violently stolen. The presence of a child in that first crime lurks like a searing imprint on the case, symbolizing the innocence shattered along with adult victims. As the national consciousness grappled with the horror, the Monster of Florence case transcended typical criminal investigation. It became a cultural phenomenon, a source of fear that rippled through Italy and beyond. Media portrayal, public debate, and even fiction took shape around the unsolved crimes, weaving the monster into the tapestry of Italian collective psyche. Yet, for all the notoriety, the killer remained elusive, a shadow moving unseen through the Tuscan nights. The mystery perplexed law enforcement, intensified public anxiety, and spawned a succession of theories and controversies that would persist for decades. The tale of Il Mostro is not merely one of horrific acts, but of an enduring enigma that haunts Italy's criminal history. As we delve further into the case, the scene is set for a story of flawed investigations and shadowy figures, but it is crucial to remember the victims who ushered in this dark legacy and the chilling reality that behind the beauty of Tuscany, silence was hiding unspeakable atrocities. Their stories deserve to be heard, their memories honored, as we begin to unravel the threads of one of the most infamous and disturbing serial killing sprees in history. The Monster of Florence was no mere legend. It was a grim reality that intruded upon the peaceful Tuscan hills, leaving a trail of death, mutilation, and unanswered questions that continue to echo through the ages. The investigation into the Monster of Florence killings, intended to unravel a gruesome mystery, instead became a tangled web of errors, missed opportunities, and questionable practices. What began with hope for justice tragically devolved into a series of fatal investigative flaws that not only obstructed the path to truth, but also cast a long shadow of doubt over the official narrative. The first monumental misstep was the wrongful conviction of Stefano Mele for the 1968 double murder insignia, a case that set a troubling precedent for what was to follow. Mele, a husband desperate to explain his wife's death, found himself the focus of a swift prosecution. Yet, even at this early stage, the evidence was fragile at best. The ballistic data, the key that could have illuminated the pattern linking all the murders, was mishandled from the start. The bullets and shell casings from the first crime scene were inappropriately stored and their chain of custody broken. This grave lapse meant that when a ballistic match was ultimately made connecting the firearm used in later killings to these earliest murders, it cast serious doubt on Mele's conviction and forced his release. The fallout underscored not merely the error of convicting him, but a systemic failure by the investigators to secure and safeguard crucial evidence. As the investigation trudged onward, further blunders emerged, each compounding the chaos. In a case riddled with horror and complexity, the loss and manipulation of physical proof became disturbingly common. Most infamous among these was the discovery of a single, unfired bullet from the murder weapon that was allegedly found in the garden of Pietro Pacciani, the man later branded the monster himself. This bullet was hailed as pivotal evidence linking Pacciani to the killings, bolstering a prosecution that was already skating on circumstantial detail. yet it was eventually revealed as planted, undermining the entire case against him and shaking public trust to its core. This act of evidence tampering was not an isolated incident, but symptomatic of a broader pattern of police misconduct that eroded the foundation required for a fair and thorough inquiry. Another persistent problem was the flawed police work that stymied early investigative progress. Initial leads focused heavily on the so-called Sardinian Trail, centering on Mele's relatives and acquaintances from Sardinia. However, the murders continued unabated even as suspects were taken into custody, forcing their release and exposure of dogmatic tunnel vision within the police ranks. Rather than adapt and diversify their approach, authorities clung to unproductive threads, wasting precious time. Adding to this dysfunction was the inconsistent and manipulative nature of key witness testimonies. The case hinged in large part on statements from Giancarlo Lotti, whose accounts twisted and shifted like smoke through the years. From one version, the murders were purportedly acts of rage stemming from sexual rejection, to another, grotesque theories involving ritualistic killings and the fetishistic feeding of victims' remains to children. Lotti's credibility, already doubtful, was further undermined by his self-incrimination and repeated contradictions. His testimony formed the backbone of convictions against Pacciani's alleged accomplices, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti himself, known cynically in the public eye as the snack buddies. Yet the shaky foundation of their convictions sparked outrage among legal experts, journalists, and many in the judiciary who saw the verdicts as a rushed attempt to close the case rather than a genuine revelation of truth. Throughout the labyrinthine investigation, systemic failings emerged at every turn. Evidence tampering was not confined to the planted bullet. Mishandling of ballistic materials, improper storage, and outright loss of physical proof riddled the case files. Premature closures of leads and cases further obstructed progress, while mounting political pressures magnified the urgency, sometimes at the expense of due diligence. Authorities appeared more concerned with providing answers to a terrified public and media than with rigorously pursuing every viable avenue. This desperation led to a breakdown in procedural integrity, creating fertile ground for miscarriages of justice. The prosecutorial approach itself became a source of controversy, culminating in what has been described as a bizarre vendetta against investigative journalists Douglas Preston and Mario Spezzi. Instead of welcoming scrutiny that might bring clarity, authorities subjected these reporters to intimidation, accusations of evidence planting, and even imprisonment. Such moves sent a chilling message, suggesting that any challenge to the official story would be met with retribution, further eroding confidence in the investigation. The cumulative effect of these errors and misfires transformed what might have been a painstaking unraveling of atrocity into a chaotic narrative rife with deception, contradiction, and despair. For every piece of evidence brought to light, another was cast into doubt or disappearance. For every testimony, suspicion loomed over its reliability. For every lead, a dead end. The truth, obscured beneath layers of mishandling and manipulation, slipped further from reach. The institutional failings were not merely unfortunate, but devastating. They compromised the fairness afforded to those accused, led to convictions built on shaky grounds, and most tragically left the victims' families without closure. They ignited public outrage and fierce debate over whether the right individuals were ever truly caught, or if the investigators had merely settled on convenient scapegoats amid relentless pressure. This section of our story reveals a dark undercurrent beneath the surface of justice, a warning about the consequences when investigation and evidence are sacrificed at the altar of expediency and when the rule of law is undermined by misconduct. It sets the stage for the next chapter, a controversial legal saga where the accused face trial on tenuous grounds, and where the quest for truth continues to wrestle with shadows of doubt. As we move forward, we must hold these fatal flaws in sharp focus, understanding that the search for answers in the Monster of Florence case is as much about confronting these institutional failings as it is about unraveling the crimes themselves. The consequences of these errors are profound, shaping the trajectory of the case and the lives intertwined within it, victims, accused, and investigators alike. In the tangled saga of the Monster of Florence, one of the most controversial and confounding chapters involves the legal odyssey of Pietro Pacciani and his alleged accomplices, Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti, infamously dubbed the Snack Buddies. This trio, linked together by prosecution yet divided by doubt, became central figures in a judicial drama marked by shaky evidence, flawed testimonies, and repeated upheavals, a narrative that lays bare the cracks in a justice system struggling to grasp the full truth amid immense public pressure. Pietro Pacciani, an itinerant farm laborer with a dark and violent past, including a prior murder conviction and histories of domestic abuse, emerged as the prime suspect in the early 1990s. His identification was fueled not only by computerized crime pattern analysis and anonymous tips, but also by unsettling parallels drawn between his earlier crimes and the monster's killings. Yet, the core physical evidence tying Pacciani to the murders was desperately fragile. The key piece, an unfired bullet allegedly found in his garden, matching the caliber used by the monster, was later exposed as police-planted evidence, unraveling much of the prosecution's case and severely compromising the investigation's integrity. In the first instance trial of 1994, despite the circumstantial nature of the evidence and growing skepticism, Pacciani was convicted and sentenced to 14 life terms for 7 of the 8 double homicides. However, this conviction was short-lived. By 1996, a higher court overturned his conviction in a stunning acquittal, with the Attorney General explicitly criticizing the investigation's lack of evidence and poor police work. The presentation of new eyewitness testimony during the appeal sparked fierce debate, but was ultimately dismissed by the presiding judge, who declined further examination time. Complicating matters further, Italy's Supreme Court annulled the acquittal, citing it as illogical and ill-considered, ordering a new trial that was never to happen due to Pacciani's death in 1998. The judicial seesaw between conviction and acquittal revealed a system in turmoil, wrestling with contradictory facts, fluctuating testimonies, and intense external pressures. With Pacciani's death, the investigative spotlight shifted to a broader theory that the murders were the work of a group led by him rather than a lone killer. Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti were brought forward as alleged accomplices, and their courtroom battle gave rise to their infamous nickname, Snack Buddies. This moniker originated from Vanni's defiant declaration during the trial that their connection was nothing more than casual socializing over snacks, a cynical rebuttal to accusations of collusion in serial murder. The phrase captured public imagination, slipping into Italian vernacular as a symbol of both dark humor and disbelief at the fragility of the evidence and the official narrative. The trials that followed in 1998 convicted Vanni and Lotti for multiple counts of double homicide, sentencing Vanni to life and Lotti to 30 years. Yet the foundation of these convictions rested heavily on the contentious testimonies of Fernando Pucci and primarily Giancarlo Lotti, whose reliability was deeply compromised by inconsistent, shifting accounts. Lotti's motives morph across statements, in 1996 portraying the crimes as wrathful reactions to rebuffed sexual advances, then in 1997 altering the narrative towards a macabre fantasy involving Pacciani feeding fetishes to his own daughters. Not only did Lotti's testimony fluctuate wildly, but he also implicated himself, a self-incrimination that only muddied the waters further. These contradictory and evolving motivations exposed critical weaknesses in the prosecution's case, inviting skepticism that the Snack Buddies convictions might have been less an unassailable truth and more a desperate attempt to close a high-profile, unresolved case. Indeed, these trials unveiled an almost Kafkaesque judicial process, verdicts overturned, appeals oscillating, and the harsh light of flawed police investigations casting long shadows over proceedings. The lack of concrete physical evidence, no DNA, no fingerprints linking the accused to crime scenes, no recovery of the murder weapon, only magnified the judicial uncertainty. The narrative constructed around these men depended largely on unreliable testimonies and circumstantial associations. The protracted legal battles peeled back layers of questionable police conduct, including planting evidence against Pacciani and problematic handling of ballistic proof, fueling public doubt and professional criticism alike. Behind this legal labyrinth lie the tragic human costs: lives lost in brutal violence, families left grieving without clear justice, and the accused subjected to trials marred by systemic failure and potential miscarriages of justice. The Snack Buddies saga is not just a story of crime and punishment, but a cautionary tale, one demonstrating how the need to solve a terrible mystery can blur the boundary between guilt and innocence. When prosecutions rest on unstable foundations, the risk extends beyond individual defendants to the very fabric of public trust in the legal system. As this chapter of the Monster of Florence investigation closes, we are left with unresolved questions that haunt the case to this day. Was justice truly served in condemning Pacciani, Vanni, and Lotti? Or were they convenient scapegoats caught in a judicial machine desperate to claim closure? The fractured, contradictory testimony, the planting of evidence, and the repeated judicial reversals highlight a justice system beset by flaws that ultimately deny us a definitive answer. This tangled legal saga compels us to reflect on the profound consequences of wrongful convictions and the dangers inherent in hurriedly built cases under intense societal strain. It reminds us that true justice demands more than presumption, conjecture, or the convenience of a courtroom label. In the shadows of the Tuscan hills, the story of the monster, the Snack Buddies, and their trials remains a haunting testament to the elusive nature of truth, and a solemn plea that, in the pursuit of justice, no stone be left unturned and no doubt ignored. As we move forward, we confront the broader fractures revealed by this saga: legal processes strained, evidential handling questioned, and human dignity challenged. The Monster of Florence case, through the prism of Pietro Pacciani and the Snack Buddies, opens a window into the complexities of forensic truth, judicial integrity, and the heavy burden borne by victims and the accused alike. The story remains unresolved, a haunting echo of a justice system wrestling with itself, urging us to remember that beyond the trials and verdicts lies the most critical question: who really was the Monster of Florence? As we reach the twilight of this haunting saga, the Monster of Florence case slips from the realm of mere criminal investigation into a shadowy labyrinth of dark theories and lingering doubts. The chilling truth is that the murders of young lovers in the Tuscan hills, though legally adjudicated in part, never fully surrendered their secrets. Instead, the vacuum left by compromised investigations and shattered evidentiary trails has allowed whispers, some eerie, others sensational, to fill the lingering silence. Among the most haunting of these speculations are accusations that a satanic cult lurked behind the horrific killings. In 2001, following years of frustrating dead ends, Chief Inspector Michel Giuttari suggested that occult forces might be at play, drawing from chilling testimony that spoke of a sinister doctor employing Pietro Pacciani to kill and harvest female genitalia for dark, ritualistic purposes. The discovery of a pyramidal stone near a villa where Pacciani once worked fueled this eerie narrative, presented as a symbol of cult activity. Yet skeptics, including investigative journalist Mario Spezzi, dismissed such claims as fanciful, calling attention to the commonplace use of such stones in the region, ordinary objects reimagined as sinister artifacts. The theory extended to question the origin of Pacciani's wealth, which seemed disproportionate for a humble farmer, hinting at unknown benefactors, possibly orchestrating crimes from the shadows. But the web of intrigue only deepened with the twisted tale of Francesco Narducci, a young doctor whose death, soon after the monster's final murder, sparked accusations of a high-level conspiracy. Prosecutor Giuliano Mignini and Giuttari posited that Narducci and pharmacist Francesco Calamandrei were both entangled in a secret society allegedly ordering the killings. The official story of Narducci's accidental drowning was fiercely contested after exhumation revealed signs of strangulation and speculations of a body switch emerged. Yet, despite the shockwaves these revelations sent through the case, the investigations collapsed. Family members and associates were acquitted, and the overarching conspiracy theory was branded as the product of overzealous prosecutors wielding unsubstantiated claims. Mignini himself became a controversial figure, indicted for abuse of office and criticized for chasing what critics labeled crazy and out-of-this-world theories. The scandal surrounding these assertions underscored a tragic pattern. Instead of illuminating truths, certain pursuits only deepened the shadows. The monster's story took another twist, with the provocative suggestion that the infamous American Zodiac killer and the Monster of Florence might be one and the same, or at least connected. Journalist Francesco Amiconi claimed in 2017 that Joseph Joe Bevilacqua, a retired U.S. Army officer, hinted at responsibility for both series of murders, even implying he manipulated evidence to link crimes across continents. Though a courtroom ultimately dismissed the investigation and condemned Amiconi's theory as bizarre, the public's fascination with this transatlantic link endured. Such claims underscore the desperation with which the mystery invites connections, however tenuous, as if any thread might tie together the unspeakable horrors spanning decades and miles. Yet, beyond the theorizing lies a more unsettling reality. The prosecutions of those who questioned or challenged the official narratives often turned sour, illustrating what many perceive as institutional sabotage. Investigative journalists Douglas Preston and Mario Spezzi, who sought to unravel the monster's secrets, faced harassment, accusations of planting evidence, and even imprisonment. The Guide's investigative group dissolved amid scandal, with leading prosecutors indicted for abuse of office. These actions reflect a disturbing pattern of stifling dissent, a shadow justice operating alongside the public legal process. Even more stark is the official status of the case itself. Though decades have passed, the Monster of Florence remains an open case. Investigations continue slowly, sporadically, as authorities re-examine long-dismissed leads and new suspects, like the elderly Giampiero Vigilante, come under scrutiny. This lingering openness speaks to an implicit acknowledgement within the Italian justice system, a recognition that despite convictions, the full truth remains tantalizingly out of reach. The Monster of Florence has transcended the role of a mere criminal enigma. It endures as a symbol of justice denied, a complex emblem of failed investigations, miscarriages of justice, and the profound human cost of unresolved terror. It calls upon us not only to reflect on the victims whose voices were silenced, but to question the very fabric of truth-seeking institutions and their resilience to pressure and error.